I was nursing a beer on my back porch, staring at the lake that had been in my family for generations, when Karen Hillsworth and her crew of HOA minions marched onto my property like they owned it. That's when I should have known my peaceful life in Lake Serenity was about to get complicated. "Oliver Landry!" she called out, clipboard in hand and a fake smile plastered across her face. "I'm so glad I caught you at home." I nodded politely, though I'd learned months ago that any interaction with Karen, our esteemed Lakeside Villas Homeowners Association president, usually ended with a headache for me. Since returning from 2 tours in Afghanistan and taking over my grandfather's property, I'd clashed with her over everything from the height of my grass to the color of my mailbox. "What can I do for you, Karen?" I asked, setting my beer down on the railing. She gestured toward the pristine shoreline that bordered the eastern edge of my 5-acre property. "The HOA board has been discussing community improvements, and we've voted to develop a small recreational area for residents. Your lakefront section would be perfect." I straightened up. "My lakefront isn't part of the HOA, Karen. My grandfather purchased this land in the 60s, long before Lakeside Villas was even conceived. The only reason I'm in your HOA at all is because the driveway entrance crosses HOA land." Her smile didn't waver. "Well, there seems to be some confusion about the property lines. According to our records, the community has access rights to the waterfront." "There's no confusion. I have the original deed and survey. That shoreline has been in my family for 3 generations." Karen waved dismissively. "We'll look into it, of course. But in the meantime, we'd like to start clearing some of the undergrowth to assess the area's potential. Nothing permanent, just a little tidying up." That was my first mistake. I should have kicked them off my property right then. Instead, I simply said, "Don't touch anything without proper documentation," and went back inside to make some calls. By the time I returned from work the next day, I ran a small custom furniture business in town. There were orange marking flags all along my shoreline and a small team with chainsaws clearing out the native shrubs that my grandfather had carefully cultivated decades ago. I sprinted down to the shore. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted over the noise of the chainsaws. A man in khakis and a polo shirt approached me with an extended hand. "Marcus Jennings, Lakefront Developers. You must be Mr. Landry. The HOA contracted us to begin preliminary work on the new Lakeside Beach Club." "Beach Club? There's no beach club going in here. This is private property." Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Sir, we have all the necessary permits and HOA approvals. Ms. Hillsworth assured us the property boundaries had been verified." I pulled out my phone. "Get your crew off my land now, or I'm calling the sheriff." Over the next 2 weeks, I found myself in a bureaucratic nightmare. The county clerk confirmed my property lines were exactly as I'd claimed, but Karen had somehow filed paperwork showing different boundaries, ones that conveniently placed about an acre of my lakefront under HOA jurisdiction. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding," Karen said sweetly when I confronted her at the next HOA meeting. "The documents we have show the community has riparian rights along that stretch." "Show me these documents," I demanded. She shuffled through some papers. "I don't have them with me tonight, but our lawyer has reviewed everything. We're proceeding with the beach club as planned." I stood my ground. "I've filed a cease and desist. Touch my property again, and I'll sue the HOA and you personally." Her expression hardened for just a moment before the smile returned. "Oliver, we're all neighbors here. The beach club will raise property values for everyone. Why not be a team player?" That night, I called my old army buddy Oscar Thompson, now a real estate attorney in the city. "Something's fishy, Ollie," he said after reviewing my documents. "The deed is clear. That shoreline is yours, free and clear. No easements, no shared access. I think they're trying to pull a fast one." "But why?" I asked. "There's plenty of community shoreline already." "I don't know, but let's find out. I'll file an injunction tomorrow morning." I should have felt reassured, but as I looked out my window that night at the twinkling lights of excavators already at work, I knew this fight was just beginning. The injunction came through, but somehow work continued. Each time I called the sheriff, they'd arrive to find the workers gone, only to return once law enforcement left. I installed security cameras, which mysteriously stopped working after a week. My breaking point came when I returned from a weekend supply run for my furniture business to find a bulldozer had cleared a 100-foot strip along my shoreline, destroying a stand of old-growth trees my grandfather had planted. In their place stood the frame of what looked like a large cabana. I was livid. I drove straight to Karen's house, a McMansion on the golf course side of the development. Her husband Todd answered the door. "Karen's not here," he said, looking uncomfortable. "She's at the pre-sales event for the beach club memberships." "Pre-sales? What pre-sales?" He shifted nervously. "At the community center. They're selling charter memberships tonight." I thanked him and sped to the community center. Through the windows, I could see Karen at a podium in front of what looked like a PowerPoint presentation. The room was packed with residents, and even people I didn't recognize from neighboring communities. I slipped in the back just in time to hear Karen announce, "And for just $5,000, charter members will have exclusive access to our luxury cabanas, private beach area, and member-only events. This is a limited opportunity as we only have 100 memberships available." On the screen behind her was a rendering of my lakefront property, completely transformed into a resort-style beach club with cabanas, a tiki bar, and a floating dock. My grandfather's distinctive boathouse had been photoshopped out of existence. I watched in disbelief as people lined up to write checks and sign contracts. This wasn't just about community access. Karen was selling memberships to a beach club on my land and pocketing the money. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "And remember," Karen continued, "all proceeds go directly to developing and maintaining this exclusive amenity. As a special bonus, the first 20 members who sign up tonight will receive complimentary sunset cruise tickets for our inaugural boat tour next month." I'd heard enough. I marched to the front of the room. "Excuse me," I said loudly. "I'm Oliver Landry, the legal owner of the property you're selling access to, and none of this has been authorized." The room fell silent. Karen's smile faltered for just a second before recovering. "Oliver! How nice of you to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the neighbor I was telling you about who's been so difficult about the community improvement project." "It's not a community improvement project," I said, addressing the crowd. "It's a scam. That land has been in my family for generations. I have the deeds to prove it. What you're buying doesn't legally exist." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Karen quickly interjected. "Mr. Landry is confused about the property boundaries. Our attorneys have confirmed the HOA's right to develop this area. Please don't let his personal grudge disrupt our exciting community enhancement." An older gentleman in the front row stood up. "I just wrote a check for $5,000. Are you saying I'm not getting what was advertised?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. "And I've been recording this entire sales pitch as evidence." Karen's face flushed. "Security!" she called. "Please escort Mr. Landry out. He's disrupting a private HOA function." 2 men approached me, but I stood my ground. "Before you touch me, you should know I've already filed an injunction against this development. Anyone who gets involved could be named in the lawsuit." The men hesitated, looking to Karen for guidance. A woman raised her hand. "I'd like to know more about this property dispute before I commit any money." Others nodded in agreement. Karen was losing control of the room, and she knew it. "The meeting is adjourned for tonight," she announced briskly. "We'll email everyone with updates. Please leave your contact information with Marjorie at the door." As the crowd dispersed, Karen marched over to me, her heels clicking aggressively on the tile floor. "You're making a big mistake, Oliver," she hissed. "The HOA has resources you can't possibly match. We will build this beach club." "Not on my land you won't," I replied calmly. "And now I know what you're really up to." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Good luck proving anything. The board stands behind this project 100%. What she didn't know was that I'd already started investigating. Oscar had connected me with Megan Garrison, an investigative reporter for the local paper who specialized in real estate fraud and had been looking into similar cases in neighboring counties. Over the next few days, Megan and I dug deeper. We discovered that Lakefront Developers wasn't just contracted by the HOA, it was owned by Karen's brother-in-law. The company had been incorporated just 3 months earlier with no previous projects to its name. Even more disturbing, we found that none of the $5,000 membership fees were going into the HOA accounts. Instead, they were being deposited into a separate LLC called Shoreline Enterprises, which traced back to Karen and 3 other HOA board members. "This isn't just a boundary dispute," Megan said as we reviewed the paperwork in my kitchen. "It's fraud. They're selling access to property they don't own and pocketing the money." "But how did they get the permits?" I asked. "Someone in the county had to approve this." Megan smiled grimly. "That's where it gets interesting. The county records show permit applications, but no actual approvals. I think they're using forged documents." Armed with this information, we contacted the county commissioner's office and discovered that the permits submitted to my HOA members were indeed falsified. The official county stamps had been copied from other legitimate permits and digitally added to these documents. Meanwhile, despite the injunction, construction on my property continued. Each morning I'd wake to the sound of equipment and find more of my land transformed. My calls to law enforcement resulted in warnings to the workers, but no real action. Oscar advised me to document everything and prepare for a major legal battle. "They're counting on you getting discouraged and giving up," he said. "That's how these predatory HOAs operate." But I wasn't about to give up land that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had purchased this property when the lake was still undeveloped. He'd built our family home with his own hands and taught me to fish off the dock he constructed from salvaged timber. This wasn't just real estate to me, it was my heritage. The situation escalated when I arrived home one afternoon to find a chain-link fence erected around the construction zone, cutting off my access to my own shoreline. A large sign read, "Future home of Lakeside Beach Club members only." I grabbed my bolt cutters from the garage and made quick work of the padlock. As I swung the gate open, I came face to face with Todd, Karen's husband. "You can't be here," he stammered. "This is an active construction site." "On my property," I reminded him, "which your wife is illegally developing." Todd looked uncomfortable. "Look, Oliver, I'm just following Karen's instructions. She handles all the HOA business." "Does she handle the fraud business too?" I asked. "Because selling access to land you don't own is fraud, Todd." "And the shell companies? The fake permits? How much do you know about what she's doing?" The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about." "Well, the district attorney will," I said. "Megan Garrison from the Chronicle is running a story next week exposing the whole scheme. You might want to distance yourself before it breaks." Todd's eyes widened. "She promised everything was legal," he whispered. "She said the HOA had clear rights to the shoreline." "She lied," I said simply. "And she's dragging you into it." That evening my phone rang. It was Todd, asking to meet privately. We agreed on a coffee shop in town, away from lakeside villas. "Karen's been obsessed with this beach club for over a year," he confessed, staring into his coffee mug. "At first, it seemed legitimate, a community project. Then I noticed large deposits in our personal account. When I asked, she said they were bonuses from her consulting business." "She doesn't have a consulting business," I pointed out. "I know that now," Todd sighed. "Last week, I found membership contracts in her home office. Over 70 of them at $5,000 each. That's $350,000, Oliver. And there were brochures for Phase 2 with higher tier memberships going for $15,000. Did you confront her?" He nodded miserably. "She said it was all above board, that the HOA was entitled to develop amenities. When I pressed about why the money wasn't in HOA accounts, she got angry, said I didn't understand how community development financing worked. And the fake permits? I didn't know about those, he insisted. But, he hesitated. But what, Todd? She has a friend in the county clerk's office. Margaret something. They have lunch every Thursday. This was the break we needed. With Todd's information and Megan's investigative skills, we uncovered a paper trail showing that Margaret Wells, a clerk in the county records office, had been altering property records for a 10% cut of the membership fees. The story broke in the Sunday edition of the Chronicle. HOA Beach Club scam, fake documents, fraudulent sales, and falsified property lines. The article detailed how Karen and 3 board members had orchestrated the scheme, selling over $400,000 in fraudulent memberships and planning to sell even more. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing nonstop with calls from angry neighbors who'd purchased memberships. The district attorney's office reached out to interview me, and the county commissioner announced an emergency review of all recent HOA permit applications. Karen, predictably, went on the offensive. She called an emergency HOA meeting where she denounced me as a troublemaker, trying to deprive the community of amenities. She insisted all the paperwork was in order and that the newspaper article was fake news, engineered by someone who didn't care about property values. But her support was crumbling. Too many residents had seen the evidence laid out in black and white. When one of her fellow board members stood up and announced his resignation, saying he'd been misled about the project's legality, the meeting descended into chaos. Through it all, construction on my property continued. Karen seemed determined to establish possession as 9/10 of the law by completing as much of the beach club as possible before legal proceedings could stop her. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hired a security team, mostly fellow veterans, to patrol my property 24/7. When Karen's construction crew arrived the next morning, they were met by 4 imposing men who politely but firmly informed them they were trespassing on private property. "We have authorization from the HOA," the foreman protested. "The HOA doesn't own this land," replied Mike, my former platoon sergeant who now ran a security company. "And we have the legal documents to prove it. You can leave voluntarily, or the sheriff can escort you off. Your choice." They chose to leave, but Karen was far from done. That afternoon, I received a certified letter from an attorney threatening to sue me for interfering with HOA operations and violating community covenants. Oscar reviewed the letter and laughed. "They've got nothing. Their entire case rests on property rights they don't have." The next day, we filed our countersuit, against Karen personally, the board members involved in the scheme, the fraudulent development company, and the HOA itself. We claimed damages for trespassing, property destruction, fraud, and emotional distress. As news of the lawsuit spread, more HOA members came forward with their own stories of Karen's abuses of power, selective enforcement of rules, suspicious bidding processes for HOA contracts that always seemed to go to friends or relatives, and disappearing funds from the community maintenance budget. The district attorney's investigation uncovered even more. Karen hadn't just been selling beach club memberships. She'd been siphoning HOA funds for years through inflated invoices for services never rendered. The beach club scheme was just her most ambitious con, one that would have netted millions had it succeeded. 2 weeks after our lawsuit was filed, Karen, Margaret from the county clerk's office, and 2 HOA board members were arrested on multiple felony charges including fraud, forgery of official documents, and embezzlement. The image of Karen being led away in handcuffs made the front page of the Chronicle. She maintained her innocence, of course, claiming she was being persecuted for trying to improve the community. In the aftermath, a temporary HOA board was appointed, and they immediately voted to officially acknowledge my property boundaries and issue a public apology. They also began the process of refunding membership fees to everyone who had bought into the beach club scam. My lawsuit proceeded despite Karen's criminal charges. Her personal assets were frozen, including the beach house in Florida that, as we discovered, had been purchased with embezzled HOA funds. The court case lasted nearly a year. Karen hired and fired 3 different attorneys, each time delaying proceedings. She attempted to declare bankruptcy to avoid damages, but the judge ruled that fraudulent activity nullified bankruptcy protections for those specific debts. Throughout it all, I slowly reclaimed my shoreline. The half-built structures were demolished, and I began the process of replanting native trees and shrubs. Some scars would take decades to heal. The old-growth trees couldn't be replaced in my lifetime, but it was a start. The day the verdict came in, I sat in the courtroom with Oscar beside me and Megan in the public gallery. Karen looked nothing like the confident HOA president who had marched onto my property a year earlier. Her carefully maintained appearance had given way to dark roots in her blonde hair and a prison-issue outfit that didn't quite fit. The judge didn't mince words. This court finds the defendants engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud both Mr. Landry and the homeowners of Lakeside Villas. The deliberate falsification of property records, fraudulent sale of access to private property, and embezzlement of HOA funds represent a profound breach of fiduciary duty and trust. The damages were substantial, $2.3 million to be paid to me for property damage, legal fees, and emotional distress. An additional $1.8 million was to be repaid to the HOA General Fund and the deceived membership buyers. Karen was personally liable for the majority of the damages, with her co-conspirators responsible for smaller portions. You will likely spend several years in state prison for the criminal charges, the judge concluded, looking directly at Karen. And when you emerge, you will find yourself financially responsible for the damage you've caused. This court hopes that provides adequate time to reflect on the consequences of your actions. As we left the courthouse, Oscar clapped me on the shoulder. How does it feel to be a millionaire? I shook my head. I doubt I'll ever see most of that money. They'll be paying it off for the rest of their lives. True, but they'll be paying it. And more importantly, you've got your land back, free and clear. No one will question your ownership again. He was right. The new HOA board had implemented reforms to prevent future abuses, including transparent accounting practices and term limits for board members. The property line dispute had been officially resolved with updated county records that clearly delineated my boundaries. That evening, I sat on my dock watching the sunset reflect off the lake, just as my grandfather had done for decades before me. The shore was still scarred from Karen's illegal development, but nature would gradually reclaim it. I had already planted new saplings to replace some of the trees that had been destroyed. My phone rang. It was Megan. Enjoying your victory? She asked. Just enjoying the peace and quiet, I replied. No construction noise, no fraudulent HOA presidents trespassing on my property. She laughed. Well, I thought you'd want to know. The state HOA regulatory board is using your case to create new guidelines for HOA governance. They're calling it the Landry Rule. All major HOA expenditures and developments will require independent verification of property rights and transparent member voting. That's something, at least. Might prevent this from happening to someone else. You've made a difference, Oliver, she said seriously. Not just for yourself, but for homeowners across the state. After we hung up, I thought about my grandfather and how he'd fought to protect this land from developers decades ago. He would have been proud of this outcome, not just the legal victory, but the precedent it set for protecting individual property rights against overreaching HOAs. As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the water, I made a decision. The small boathouse my grandfather had built had been damaged during Karen's Beach Club construction. Instead of just repairing it, I would rebuild it, larger and stronger, as a workspace for my furniture business. It would be my own personal victory marker, a reminder that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable opposition. Karen Hillsworth had tried to steal my heritage and my property for her personal gain. Instead, she'd lost everything: her reputation, her freedom, and her finances. Meanwhile, I still had my land, my integrity, and now, a platform to help others facing similar battles. Some of my neighbors had suggested I run for the HOA board in the upcoming election. I was considering it. Not because I had any particular desire to enforce rules about lawn height or house colors, but because someone needed to ensure that what happened to me never happened again. As darkness settled over the lake and the first stars appeared overhead, I raised my beer in a silent toast to my grandfather, to justice served, and to the peculiar American institution of homeownership, complications, HOAs, and all.